Good morning, good afternoon, and for some of you, good evening. And I welcome you to the first in a series of AGIF sustainability webinars in 2021. My name is Eric Lynch, and I'm the CEO of the Asian Golf Industry Federation, and I'll be your host and facilitator for today's webinar. By way of background, the AGIF has launched a series of webinars in late 2020 and ran 10 online seminars in the latter part of last year. The feedback and participation from the global industry was fantastic and gratifying to receive, and as such, webinars now become mainstay of our activities now and in the post-COVID period. So most every week on Thursday, we will continue to deliver webinars on turf and club management with industry leaders to supply career building information to professionals in Asia and the rest of the world. We have a great lineup of speakers generously willing to share their times and expertise with us today. Today and other days. A bit about the AGIF. The AGIF, Asian Golf Industry Federation, is a non-for-profit membership federation comprised of suppliers and facilitators, facilities in the turf, club, and sports industry. The federation focuses on building sustainable practices in both environmental and economic aspects throughout the Asia-Pacific region. We believe that key in the development of a sustainable industry is the education and empowerment of professionals in the industry, such we have events like today. We've developed the AGIF certificate in greenskeeping, which is supported by the RNA and 5 AGIF member organizations. The CIG focuses on development of the skill set of greenskeeper turf professionals throughout Asia. We also focus on club management education and are partnered with the Club Management Association of America. We've rolled out education in Asia for the pathway to the certified club manager degree. The CCM is considered the gold standard in club management industry globally, and managers in Asia can now achieve the necessary education here in Asia as a result of this partnership with the CMA. It is vital to have strong partners in implementing education throughout Asia, and our education is recognized for credits by the PGA of America, the PGA of GB in Ireland, the PGA of Australia, the PGA of Japan, Club Management Association of America, and the GCSAA. Due to travel restrictions from the COVID-19 pandemic, webinars are the only way we can continue to deliver education at the moment. We'll resume event education when travel restrictions ease, and we'll keep you posted as this develops. Over the last few months, we spent a lot of time improving our digital offering and membership benefits. For more information, please log on to www.agif.asia, as well as our LinkedIn and Facebook company pages. Please also sign up for our weekly newsletter to join the 10,000 industry contacts and receiving weekly industry updates. The AGIF is a non-for-profit federation, so now more than ever, we rely upon membership dues to operate. So if you like what we do, and or you think your facility or company will benefit from communicating with the industry, please note that our membership benefits are substantial and can be seen on the website under AGIF membership benefits. Please take a look. And if you're already an AGIF member, thank you. Your ongoing support is greatly appreciated. And speaking of member support, we'd like to thank the sponsors of today's webinars, Simplot Professional Products, Sustain Natural Fertilizers, and the Toro Company. Without their support, we would not be able to run events like this. So we thank them for their patronage and support. On to some housekeeping issues. Our speaker today, Dr. John Sorochan, will present for roughly 50 to 60 minutes, and we'll have 30 minutes after that for the Q&A. The chat and QA buttons are on throughout, so please feel free to ask questions, which we then can voice to Dr. John during the Q&A. There are also, now on to the main event. I'd like to welcome Dr. John Sorochan to the AGIF Sustainability Series. A native of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, John began working in ground screw at Earl Grey Golf Country Club in 1988. He received his PhD in turfgrass science from the Michigan State in 2002, and is presently the Distinguished Professor of Turfgrass Science and Management in the Plant Science Department at the University of Tennessee, UT. Dr. John is also the director for UT's Center of Athletic Field Safety, and he teaches several undergraduate and graduate level classes in Turfgrass Science and Management program. His research program coordinates investigations on environmental turf stress physiology, including shade, indirect heat, drought, wear stress for golf courses, sports turf, and commercial and home lawn turf. His research also includes athletic field management, including athletic field performance and safety, athlete to surface interactions, new cultivar and species evaluation for management and use, sustainable strategies for reduced input on the golf course, residential turf and sod production, Since arriving at the University of Toronto, Dr. John has given over 250 invited presentations at regional, national, and international professional meetings, including Singapore and Japan. Dr. John, welcome to the Sustainability Series. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, that makes me feel really old when you said 1988, and I think back when I worked at Earl Grey a long time ago. So yeah, I guess I am old, but hello everybody, and it's great to virtually be here tonight. For me, it's Wednesday night at now 10:09 p.m. So I know it's morning for most of you, and I look forward to sharing my presentation with you guys talking about shade. So I'm just going to load the screen up here, and hopefully that starts to work. If I think it should be good now, I hope.
All good. All good.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking to you about shade and the effects of low light on turfgrass. And I'd also like to just thank the Asian Golf Industry Federation for inviting me to speak today. So this is the first time talking to this group, and it's definitely a pleasure. And I got into doing shade research because when I was an undergrad, actually at Michigan State University, I got back from doing an internship at the Boulders Golf Resort in Carefree, Arizona, where it's one of the sunniest places in the United States. And when I got back to Michigan State, I started working for Dr. Trey Rogers, turfgrass professor there. And our charge was trying to figure out how to put grass in the Pontiac Silverdome in just outside of Detroit, Michigan, for the 1994 World Cup soccer, for four soccer games for the 1994 World Cup that was hosted in the U.S. So World Cup's coming back to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but back to the U.S. in 2026, and it looks like we're going to have potentially 5 indoor stadiums that will be dealing with indoor light. And that's what got me into doing research, though, was that shade. How did we keep grass alive in a dome stadium for 30 days and have it play to the highest level expectations for professional sport? And so when we talk about shade, it starts with light, and light is the most abundant and important component to growing for plants. It's required for what we call photosynthesis. That's how the plants get their chemical energy to grow and functionally grow. So if you think of the turfgrass plant, it absorbs the light energy of the sun energy and carbon dioxide that it takes through the stomates of the leaves and water that it takes up through the roots, and it yields, or it evolves, simple sugars or carbohydrates. And it also evolves water and oxygen to the atmosphere that we can breathe. But it's those carbohydrates that's the backbone of the plant to be able to grow and metabolize and create its structural growth. And when you think of light, there's several components of light. And what's important for turfgrasses in photosynthesis is what we call photosynthetically active radiation. And this is basically the visible light spectrum, or the colors of the rainbow, from your violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red light that make up what we call photosynthetically active radiation. And that's the light energy in wavelengths that turfgrasses use, or all plants use, to photosynthesize. Below 380, we have ultraviolet lights, we have far red light that goes above it. And, in a little more specifics of it, the light components get broken down into 2. There's light quality and light quantity. Light quality are the actual wavelengths, and they're measured in nanometers. And it goes from the very short cosmic and X-rays to the long radio waves. And then, as I said, the visible light spectrum, approximately 380 to 700 nanometers, is that photosynthetically active radiation, or that PAR light that plants use. And if you think of those wavelengths, you just think of it's the distance between ripples, and the closer that ripple, the shorter the wavelength. Also, the closer that ripple, the shorter the wavelength, the more the energy. So those cosmic and X-rays have a lot more energy than the visible light spectrum, which has more energy than the long radio waves, which is what we'd call low energy wavelengths. And so that's the light quality. And then there's light quantity. And so that's the light quantity is what's the intensity of each of those individual wavelengths of light. And the light quantity is what's most important is for photosynthesis to occur. How much light does the turfgrass actually receive? The shorter the wavelength, the more the energy, as I already mentioned as well. And why are plants and turf grasses typically green is because plants absorb all light in that visible light spectrum, but it doesn't absorb as much of that green and yellow light. And that's what's reflected back and what gives us the visual color of the plants being green. But it absorbs, the violet and blue light and the red light. Light's also used, the wavelengths of light are also used in different components. The turfgrass breeders used to use, and plant breeders used to use ultraviolet light, high intensity ultraviolet light to create mutations. The same way we get ultraviolet light that causes mutations in our skin and pigmentations and we get tanned. And hopefully we don't get, cancer cells that can develop, which are also mutations. But that's, UV light what it can do is cause gene expression to change within a plant. And then you get a new variegated variety that's evolved from that. It's something that was used many years for traditional breeders to develop new varieties, or just natural selection over time. As plants get exposed and to the light, it can cause changes. Maybe a dwarfism gene, for instance, to be expressed. And then the important visible light spectrum, approximately 380 to 700 nanometers for turfgrass growth. When you look at that violet and blue light, 380 to the 525, 530 maybe, that violet and blue light is a high energy light, and that's a stimulus for short, sturdy growth in the turfgrass. Green light is often, some of it's absorbed, but a lot's reflected back, and that gives us the color. And then the yellow and red light, from the 550 up to the 700 nanometer wavelengths, is what we typically get and has a stimulus for cell elongation. Far red light is important for responding for plants, for turfgrasses to go to seed or germination to occur, to flowering and germination. We measure the light intensity or the light quantity in what we call micromoles per meter squared per second. So what is the intensity at that second in a square meter of the light being absorbed? And under full sun conditions, and it's going to vary, there's a lot of variances, but like a really bright, intense day would be 2000 micromoles per meter squared per second. We measure this with what's called a spectroradiometer. And we can also have what's called a photospectral radiometer that can measure the individual wavelengths. But an average sunny day, depending on some different parts of the world, this is going to vary, but a 60 moles of light would be a really, per meter squared per day of photosynthetically active radiation. All turf grasses are going to grow really well with that amount of light. But all of this, measuring light in micromoles per meter squared per second and how many moles of light per day is meaningless without a time factor. So that total irradiance dose, to calculate that daily, what we call daily light interval, and daily light interval is the number of photosynthetically active radiation moles per meter squared per day. So what is our DLI? What we might say is how much light do we want to look at? And again, this light intensity varies with a lot of different factors. And one of them is seasonal. In Singapore, it's not as much. What is still, because the different seasons are more cloudy and things like that, where the day lengths don't change. But the season does. The further you get from the equator, the days get shorter and longer, depending on if it's spring or if it's summer or winter. So summer being the greatest, the longest days. Where Eric and I are both from in Canada, it could be in the summertime, it's light at 4 a.m. It doesn't get dark till 11:30 at night. But in the wintertime, because it's so far north, 54 degrees north latitude, in the wintertime, doesn't get light till 8:39 in the morning, and it's already dark by 3 p.m. So that season and then the latitude has a big impact on the quantity of light that gets to the earth or to the plant. The time of day, when the sun's at the solar zenith, at the highest point in the sky, that also lets you know when the intensity of the light is greatest. There's a reason we can look at sunsets and sunrises when the sun's setting, and it's nice to look out, because the time of the day, the sun's lower in the horizon. So there's what we call a lot more atmospheric screening, a lot more atmosphere that sun gets diluted by, so that we can actually look at it with our eyes without being strained. Topography has an effect on light quantity. Is it a north or south facing slope? And then shade. Is there trees, buildings? Do you have a stadium? Do you have what's causing it? So these are all things that can impact light quantity. And the effects of low light quantity on a turfgrass plant, you get reduced photosynthesis. If that plant doesn't have that ability to produce its energy, it starts to suffer and get stressed. So we see poor recovery from damage, reduced density, poor stress tolerances. And this is an example of a daily light variation of sunlight. This happens to be Madison, Wisconsin in the United States. So a northern climate where they grow cool season turf grasses. And these are what we call, this is moles per hour of par per hour. And you can see it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. There's none because it's nighttime. The sun's starting to come up at 6, 7 o'clock. You're starting to get some intensity. And by 1300, 1 o'clock, the sun's at the highest point and you're getting a little over 4 moles of PAR during that 1 hour. And it starts to go back down. And then all of a sudden you get this dip and it pops back up between 1600 and 1700 hours. And what's happened there was some cloud cover came over and reduced this light at about 1630. So you can see, a lot of things can affect this. But if you add all these up, you can start to figure out how many moles of light that you had during that day. And this just happens to be one snippet of one day. You can look at it seasonally. Again, this is Madison, Wisconsin. And if you look at in January, a northern climate, northern hemisphere, it's winter time and it's probably under a couple of feet of snow in Madison, Wisconsin. So you don't have to worry about not having enough moles of light in January and February and early March because the grass isn't growing because it's too cold. Same with on the far right in November and late October and November, it's become wintertime in this climate. But you can see in the summertime, in June, where the longest days of the year are, you can see that you're only getting at maximum, 40, 44 moles of light per day because they're so far north and the intensity of the light is just not there with maybe it's humidity in the dust in the air, as well as just geographically where they're located. They're not getting as 60 moles of light per day that you might get in say Arizona. So other things that affect light quantity and quality, tree canopies. So you get all of your desirable photosynthetically active radiation. You got trees and you're trying to grow grass. It dilutes the light. It reduces the energy of light, the quantity, and it also changes the quality of the light and the wavelengths a little bit too. What we see a lot in shade is we get that reduced blue light because the wavelengths are reduced at high energy and it's elongated out because the energy is bending around the trees potentially, and you get that etiolated or elongated growth of grasses under shade. But that reduced light quality causes more delicate leaves, which are damaged easily, more succulent. So when you're trafficking or walking on them, if it's a sports field or just a high traffic area on a golf course, it just gets more wear, slower to recover. And the low red light causes the low blue light causes rapid vertical shoot growth. So a little summary of the light, 2000 moles would be a really sunny day. If you had 30% shade, it would be a fraction of that. You'd only have, instead of 60 moles of light per day, you'd only have 19 moles. And then we also have trees that cause reductions. So if you think of the sun coming up in the morning, you can see the sun because it's got all that atmosphere that you can see through. It's only 7% of what the sun would be at 1 p.m. in the afternoon when it's at its most intensity. It's only at 7%. And that's why we can look at it. 10 a.m., it's at 75% of what it is. So it's a percentage, and the intensity gets greater as it goes on. But as the sun begins to set and there's trees blocking it, instead of it being 60 or 50% of what it should be, it's now down to 4 being put through that turf. And this is where we start to see reductions in light and shade stress issues coming. It's estimated in Dr. Beard's textbook that that 20 to 25% of all managed turf grass at some point is under some sort of shade stress. So that's, that's significant, amount of turf. This happens to be a picture of the Houston Astrodome built in 1965, baseball stadium where the Houston Astros used to play. And it was originally Tifway 419 Bermuda grass. And what happened was they ended up going to artificial turf because the outfielders catching pop flies said the glare of the sun going off the glass, they couldn't see. So they painted the glass black and the grass died. So they had to go to artificial turf, and hence the name AstroTurf was born. But where is turfgrass shade a problem? 25% of all managed turf at some point is a shade stress, is under some sort of shade stress. Where is it a problem? Well, definitely in golf. This happens to be Hamburger Land and Golf Club in Hittfeld, Germany. One of the shadiest golf courses I've seen on some of their holes. This is their #1 green before their renovation several years ago, but you can see the heavy, heavy trees on this green. So shot back from the fairway, looking up into the green, just a lot of heavy tree shade causing a lot of shade stress problems on that golf course. So golf is obviously a place where we see a lot of shade stress. Home lawns, residential areas, parks and rec, in commercial landscapes, a lot of shade stress. Here's a heavily shaded yard, but this is shade tolerant variety of grass. Sports stadiums. This is Amsterdam Arena. And this happened to be a picture a long time ago before the grow light technology being implemented and the use of plant growth regulators. And what they did in Amsterdam Arena when they first built this stadium, which had a retractable roof, and this is back in the 90s, was they would resod it 4 times, almost 5 times, sometimes 5 times a year throughout the soccer season, because the grass, as soon as it got put in, there wasn't enough light and it started to die. And if you look on this picture, this is an old picture from an old digital camera, so not the highest visuals, but you can see a lot of black specks out in the middle of that field. Those are pigeons. Those pigeons are out there eating the perennial ryegrass seed that they were just continually throwing down. They sodded this with Poa pratensis, Kentucky bluegrass, and as soon as it was in the stadium, it just started dying. So they're always throwing lolium seed down, lolium perennial ryegrass seed, and feeding the pigeons. And it looks good from a distance, but when you got up close, you could see that the density decreased. It never did root, so you could pull out little plugs like that, and it just didn't do very well. And I'll go back to the stadium because later on in the seminar here today, because showing some of the changes that have happened over time. But soccer stadiums, they got spectator covered, comfort. You want to make sure, but that blocks light for the stadium, so it causes issues. Just people playing in wintertime in northern climates where you're further away, days are short. You'd think it's an open air stadium, but there's not enough light because it's just the wrong time of year to get enough daily light intervals or moles of light in the daytime to adequately grow quality turf grass. You can even be really close to the equator, such as Singapore's National Stadium. The stadium in the south corner, parts of it, southeast corner, never see direct sunlight because of the architectural design of that stadium. When grass is in the stadium, it's always under shade. And early on, they used to use a lot of high pressure sodium grow lights, and I'll talk more about these later, but grow lights, but to try to help sustain and keep the growth. And you can see just an overhead picture in that southeast corner. It's just a hard place to get light and keep grass growing. You get secondary problems that occur from shade as well. This happens to be a Bermuda grass fairway, and this is in early summer where it's come in a what we call the transition zone in the US. And you can see, if you can kind of see, this picture everything to the left of this cursor as it's going up and down isn't as good. You can see the cart paths because they love to ride golf carts in the States on turf. And you can see the wheel tracks on this side. The turf looks a lot better on this side. And what's the cause of this? It's early summer. The grass is green, obviously greened up and coming out of dormancy. The trees are over here, the shadows are over here, but what's going on? Well, the days are now longer in June, but if you go back to February, March, and March and April, when the grass is just starting to green up and come out of dormancy, you can still see the shadows because the sun is lower in the horizon, causing a lot of shade. And so when there's a frost, it stays colder longer, a lot of damage, and just not enough light for that grass to adequately grow. So you start to see other damage long term. C3 and C4 grasses, the cool season and the warm season grasses are very different in how they assimilate and how do they photosynthesize. The warm season grasses, the way they assimilate CO2, are more efficient at photosynthesis, which gives them the ability to accumulate those carbohydrates under higher temperatures and they're more efficient. Unfortunately, they can't do it and they can't partition as well, and they're not as shade tolerant. So the warm season grasses are not as shade tolerant as the cool season turf grasses. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So what effects does shade have on turf grass? Morphologically, if you compare a turf grass plant in full sun versus that same plant in shade, so let's say this is a nice zoysia grass plant right here, or Bermuda grass, which we know is a real poor shade tolerant in full sun, this is what it looks like. But as you start to put it in shade, you get morphological changes that the leaf thickness decreases, the plant height starts to elongate, it gets actually taller, the density decreases, tillering decreases, so you have less tillers coming out of that plant from that one crown. Your growth habit is affected, so you maybe don't have those daughter, stolon, and rhizome plants emerging because there's no, and then you get a reduced what we call root to shoot ratio. Here you have a nice balance of root to shoots, and here you got more shoots and less roots. Because when we go back to the second or third slide today, photosynthesis, taking that light energy. When there's not enough light, the plant doesn't have enough energy to send a new stolon or rhizome out to expand or elongate. It doesn't have enough energy to put another tiller out of that crown of that plant. And it doesn't have enough energy to grow roots. What's happening is the defensive mechanisms of that plant are elongating those leaves to try to increase surface area to absorb more sunlight to photosynthesize. And if sunlight continues to be limiting and it's a lot of shade, eventually that plant can wither and die, or hopefully, measures can be taken. Physiologically, lower carbohydrate reserves, not enough sunlight doesn't produce the carbohydrates that they need. They get reduced transpiration, lack of rooting, the lack of photosynthesis, the plant's not taking up water and transpiring it out the stomates to the atmosphere. Lower respiration rates. Respiration is the reverse of photosynthesis, where it burns carbohydrates, part of the natural process of photosynthesis and respiration. Plants are more succulent, which means that they're more vulnerable for stresses, including environmental stresses and mechanical stresses. And you get a reduced cuticle thickness. So that layer that helps protect that plant. So if sun does hit it, it gets more toxicity. Or if you happen to put a herbicide on it, it may be more likely, or a plant growth regulator, it can cause some phytotoxicity to the leaf and cause some damage where it normally wouldn't under full sun conditions. Environmental conditions also change under shade. Reduced air movement as a result of whatever's causing the shade, whether it's trees or a building. You get more buffered temperatures, so you don't get those extremes of highs and lows, but the humidity may be more high, so you get more vulnerability for foliar or fungal diseases to occur. And if there's happen to be trees causing it, you get competition from the trees for water and nutrients. So just another secondary and tertiary impact on the turf grass. As a result, thin, delicate leaves form. They damage easily. What do? Can you restrict traffic? No, it's really hard to do on a sports field or even a golf course. You want to make sure you closely monitor diseases. That increased cell succulence causes cell disruption under pressure, so it becomes more vulnerable when you apply traffic. So management, again, restrict traffic, and we'll get more details of these. Reduce nitrogen and irrigate as necessary. I'll talk about these. But you get that rapid vertical growth when you get shade. And most plant resources are allocated to this rapid shoot growth under limited or low light conditions. And the limiting resources available of carbohydrates aren't there for root growth, stem growth, and other forms of metabolism to occur. And this is where what shade stress is. So on the left is Bermuda grass under shade stress, cynodon species, and on the right is under full sun. And you always see when you put Bermuda grass, and I always like to say Bermuda grass is the single worst shade tolerant turf grass we've got. And I'll say it comes in 4th place in a 3-horse race. It's that bad. But when you have it in shade, all of a sudden that stolon, well, those plants start to get kind of woody and stocky and stand up and stemmy, really thin and just unesthetically pleasing. And it's just not a very shade tolerant grass, but you just see that rapid vertical growth that occurs. Again, a healthy growing plant, say Bermuda grass or zoysia grass, whatever it is, you got a good balance of root growth and shoot growth and stolon or rhizome growth. When you get in shade, everything is reduced because there's not enough light to produce sustainable growth. And you've got a higher ratio of shoot growth and a reduced ratio component of root and stolon or rhizome growth that occurs. So how do we manage this under shade? Well, for golf, if it's a green, move the cups more often, utilize the entire green. Maybe if it's the back corner of a green, that's shady, you want to reduce the number of times you put pin placements there. Not ideal, but that's what you'd maybe have to do. Restrict traffic, particularly cart traffic on fairways. Monitor disease activity. Use preventative fungicides. Limit nitrogen fertilization, and apply minimal irrigation. And I'm going to go into these in more detail. Again, tree pruning, root pruning. Can you do some pruning? The use of plant growth regulators, anything to provide more sunlight. For cool season grasses, it's ideal to, if you have a choice, to get more morning sun than afternoon sun, because that's when they're more efficient at photosynthesizing. But I'll go into some details of these. Again, it comes down to these primary cultural practices. When we grow turf grasses, we don't want to overdo things. It's a simple mowing, fertilization, irrigation, cultivation, and pest management, controlling weeds, diseases, and insects. And we want to make sure we do these specifically and for the shade stress, maybe differently than you would for grasses in full sun. When you look at mowing height on golf course putting greens in full sun, you've got your putting green grass, your Bermuda green. It's got a more prostate growth, high density, green speeds are fast. When it's in shade, you get that more upright growth, but the density is poor, and actually the green speeds may be faster because it's under a stress. So increasing the green height on a shaded green maybe can help. But using research to figure this out, again, looking at that one slide, the annual variation of moles of light per day. Warm season grasses, as I said, are not as shade tolerant as cool season grasses. And this is all species of warm season grasses, from our St. Augustine grasses to our Bermuda grasses, and it varies by variety. But, there's a range of about 30 to 55 moles or percent of full sunlight they need, anywhere from about 18 to 34 moles of light per day. You can get, that would be considered the limits for warm season turf grasses. That's some sort of shade stress can be occurring at the lower limits of these. Cool season grasses, more shade tolerant, we can get down to 15 to 28% of full sun and still have adequate turf grass growth occurring with these grasses. So again, as low as 10 moles of light per day. I always like to show this slide and the next one that I got from my friend Micah Woods. And it's showing some different regions of Southeast Asia. We got Bangkok, and it's the annual light intensities on what we'd say a full sunny day. And the green line would be Bangkok in Thailand. And then the kind of the orange dotted one is Hong Kong. You can see a little bit further north. And then Singapore, closer to the equator, is the purple dotted line. And then Tokyo, the furthest north of these cities, it's kind of I guess this kind of reddish, dusty rose looking color right here going. And you can see, the more seasonal effect depending on getting to the summer. And you can see this is, a lot of light, and you can get as high as 60 some moles of light per day in Tokyo and close to that in Singapore. And You got a lot of, on sunny days, you get a lot of intense sunlight, but that's not the average. In Southeast Asia, that's not very common to have full sun, low humidity days. A common day, a normal sunlight intensity day in these cities is a lot lower. You're looking at maybe in the summertime, in the summer months, July, you're getting upwards of only, 30 to not even 40 moles of light per day. All of a sudden now we start getting shade stress issues that start to occur on these grasses at different times of the year just because of the inherent. This is where the Bermuda grasses, don't do as well. We know zoysia grasses are more shade tolerant. Where are they native to? They're native to Southeast Asia. The Bermuda grasses are native to Africa, where it's a lot more bright, intense sunlight. So that's, but we're trying to adapt these grasses. And I love that the new zoysia grasses are starting to take off. We're doing a lot of zoysia grass putting green work here in the University of Tennessee. And I know that there's a lot of courses with the Primo and going to the new varieties, Xeon zoysia grasses, doing a lot. But turf grasses definitely vary. The cool season grasses are more shade tolerant. Poa supina or supina bluegrass is probably the single most shade tolerant grass I've worked with. Unfortunately, it's really a what we call a true cool season turf grass. It does not like a lot of high temperatures. It's native to the Alps in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. But it's a really good shade tolerant grass. I've seen it at greens height on courses up in Finland. But tall fescue, the festuca species, the grasta species, the Lolium species aren't that great for shade tolerance compared to the other cool season grasses. But the warm season grasses aren't as good. I've got the zoysia grasses. The zoysias here grouped together. The zoysia matrellas are definitely more shade tolerant than the japonica types. And again, the key is to look at the Bermuda grass down at the bottom. It is by far the least shade tolerant grass. Well, what effect does this have? What the species have? And the same way that we can measure light intensity when we do it in micromoles per meter squared per second, we can measure the photosynthetic efficiency of different turf grasses. And this is some neat work done by Stiers and Rogers back in 1996, published in 2001, where they took Poa supina, like the most shade tolerant turf grass that I said that I'm familiar with, and Poa pratensis, Kentucky bluegrass. And what they did was in East Lansing, Michigan, the United States, they, in an indoor low light situation where there was only 3.5 moles of light per day. So that's extremely heavy shade. What they did was they had chambers and they had a photosynthesis meter where they pumped in the air, and the air going in, they knew how much CO2 was in the air going in. And then when it went through the chamber where the grasses were growing, they measured the air coming out, the flow rate, and the change in CO2. And if the plant was photosynthesizing, it would take up some of that CO2 and evolve oxygen. And based on the density of the turf grass, the rate of the airflow through, you can measure the photosynthetic efficiency of that turf grass. And Poa pratensis, Kentucky bluegrass, happens at this low light level, photosynthesized at 1 micromole per meter squared per second of energy. That's its photosynthetic efficiency rate. The shade tolerant variety of, or species of Poa supina, photosynthesized, at 1.5 micromoles per meter squared per second. So 1.5 times more efficient than that. So inherently that grass, that's a shade tolerant species, is more shade tolerant because it can photosynthesize more efficiently at a lower light level. So here it is, Poa supina in a dense shade in a lawn situation at Dr. Gerhard Nohn's yard in Germany. You can see growing again, heavy shade by these rhododendron plants. You can see it does really well. Some of the first work on actually trying to select a variety came out of Tifton, Georgia for Bermuda grass. The variety ST5, known as Tifgren now, was actually bred to be, or it wasn't bred to be, but they actually selected it as a varietal release to be as a shade tolerant grass. And they did it in trials, and they compared it to Tifway Bermuda grass and Tif Sport Bermuda grass and looked at it under low light conditions. and showed its experimental number that it had, higher quality levels, visual quality under the low lights than those other two varieties. So they said this is a grass that does better under 70% continuous shade. What I want to point out though is it's still a Bermuda grass, and Bermuda grasses still are the least shade tolerant turf grasses we have. And so you're splitting hairs from one Bermuda grass variety to another. But when you go to a different species like a Zoysia mitrella, those are going to be a lot more shade tolerant. Again, I like to show this slide. This is an early slide of the Singapore National Stadium when they had perennial ryegrass, trying to grow perennial ryegrass on the equator, which I'd never understood initially. A lot of problems. Obviously, the temperatures, the humidity, and the shade were all problems that ryegrass just didn't survive. They had the hybrid stitch system in there, and it was a futile effort. So they eventually changed it to trying to go to a hybrid system with Bermuda grass, knowing that the temperatures were there, but the Bermuda grass just didn't have the quality. And my good friend Mr. Jonathan Tail, over a lot of time and a lot of trial and error, when he came on board and started doing the responsible for the surface, he went from the Bermuda grass to looking at zoysias, and he went to the japonicas to now the mitrella types. But here is Zoysia japonica in the stadium in 2019. Look at the high quality. Still, that southeast corner has a lot of shade issues, so now they're putting LED lights on there to help grow it when it's in there for multiple weeks for an event. But they've gotten into a system where they have 3 nurseries, and they grow the sod outside in the nurseries. And when they're coming to have an event, they come roll out the sod in big roll sod, and they do the lay and play systems, and they put it out there a couple of weeks before, get it all knitted in, get it in nice shape, and they start to have the events. And they went from ryegrass to Bermuda grass to a high quality, excellent looking pitch of zoysia grass. It is now the newest pitch versions is now what we call Xeon, a variety called Xeon zoysia grass, which does really well in low light conditions. And I know, talking with Jonathan quite regularly, that it's a continuous, it's a research, a trial and error. And we're going to get ready to look at some new varieties that can be there. There's other varieties that are darker green, and do they have a better light harvesting, and do they do better under shade? So those are some things that I know Jonathan wants to look at going forward. So it's always a continuous effort, but now it's just, I think this stadium has come a long ways from when it first opened to, obviously, I know it has, to the quality surfaces that it now provides. But mowing and traffic, those cultural practices that are so important, the recommended cutting height for grass, when you have it under shade, you want to try to, if you can, anything you can do to mow it at the highest acceptable range for your greens, your tees, your fairways, your sports field, that's what you want to do. Because the higher you can mow that grass, the more leaf area you can provide for it to absorb that sunlight energy to photosynthesize and produce those carbohydrates. You can also hopefully reduce some of your mowing frequencies if you can raise the height a little bit, because that mowing causes a mechanical wound, and it takes carbohydrates to heal that wound. The more you cut, the more you mow, the more energy it takes to heal. And if there's low lights, it's a challenge. This is some work done at Oklahoma State by Dr. Greg Bell on creeping bentgrass, Agrostis stolonifera. But this same concept would apply to any species of grass. He had the Agrostis at greens height being mowed at a low mowing height of 2.5 millimeters. And he, again, similar to what the work that Stiers and Rogers did measuring the photosynthetic efficiency, they found when you incrementally increase the mowing height from 2.5 to 3.2 millimeters, just that little bit of increase in mowing height increases the photosynthetic capacity by 25%. Going from 2.5 to 3.8 millimeters in mowing height, that's still a low enough mowing height to get some good green speeds, raises that ability of that plant to grow, photosynthesize by 50%. It doubles how much it can photosynthesize at that low mowing height. And it's important to see this, because if you're trying to think of green speeds and those things, and you've got shade issues, don't go for the speeds by lowering your mowing heights. You get that from top dressing and lightweight greens rolling. Raise your mowing heights. You can get your speeds other ways. Fertilizing, you know, we definitely need a lot more research to be done on growing turf grasses and what's the best fertilization for low light. Basically, turf grown, the rule of thumb is apply about half the rate that you would typically apply in full sun of nitrogen. And I'm only going to talk about nitrogen. Nitrogen is the driving force. It's the driving element for all turf grass growth. It's the primary nutrient, and it's the one that causes a lot of cell and shoot elongation. And if you do a lot of nitrogen fertilization, you can grow that plant out of itself under shade stress conditions. So higher rates of nitrogen will weaken the turf, or maybe not even go unused. So, you want to use less nutrients when they're in shade because the grass just isn't growing. Best time to apply fertilizers when the plant most needs the nutrients. So a light, frequent application, probably have some slow release nutrients in there. So it's constantly available, but you don't want to get high rates of nitrogen to get that surge of growth, or that, because that's going to take a lot of energy, and that's just going to really stress the turf grass even more. Again, some work done at Oklahoma State University in the United States here. I'm looking at, shade stress or turf and shade, where they under heavy shade with normal nitrogen, as I said, that causes the plants to elongate, the leaves to grow. It grows itself right out of it because it's not getting enough sunlight to produce enough energy, but the nitrogen's pushing it to grow. That where they didn't fertilize it at all, still doesn't look very good, but it looks better because it didn't exhaust all of its carbohydrate reserves trying to grow because it was over fertilized with nitrogen. So again, limit your nitrogen fertilization is the take home point. Some other works with PGRs and foliar fertilizers, looking at comparing granular and foliar. Again, I understand this is on cool season grasses, Poa pratensis, Agrostis stolonifera, and Poa supina. But again, Poa supina, what I can say is you got a shade tolerant grass. It didn't matter if you did a foliar or a granular application, it did better. It had high quality. But with the Poa pratensis, a foliar application wasn't as good as a granular application. And again, not a very shade tolerant grass. This is all under heavy shade, but the granular was better than the foliar. Whereas the Agrostis stolonifera did better with a foliar application than it did a granular. So different species respond differently to different ways of getting fertilization and how they grow under low light conditions. Again, this emphasizes the point that this work needs to be done. We need a lot of work. We're still needing work to be done on warm season grasses. How does this work on zoysia grasses? How does this work on Bermuda grasses? Foliar versus granular. What rates are best? Again, here's just a picture of the granular versus the foliar comparison on the Poa pratensis. Some of the response and reasoning was maybe there's better uptake through the leaves on the Agrostis stolonifera. There's more root mass on the Poa pratensis, so it had twice the root mass, so maybe it was able to get more energy and partition some of its carbohydrates. And again, while supina bluegrass is heat sensitive, there was no effect on the granular versus the foliar nitrogen application. Irrigation, I don't want to go too much into this because there's the debate of light and frequent versus deep and frequent. Again, when I talk about photosynthesis, light energy, CO2, and water. Make sure water is not limiting, but don't overwater. How do you not overwater? Use the soil. There's several kinds out there, but a soil moisture probe to make sure that you have plant available water so the turfgrass plant can take up water to photosynthesize and help produce energy, because it needs that light energy to break the water molecules in the plant where it evolves the oxygen to the atmosphere, but those hydrogens can be taken off and added to the CO2 to make carbohydrates. So never make water limiting, but use a soil moisture probe to make sure that you don't have too much water. And under shade, you never need as much water as you do in full sun. So full sun, if you've got your 100% ET and you might be watering your turf 3 times a week, under 80% shade and only 40% ET, you probably only have to water 1 time a week. So every environment, every micro environment is going to be different. And using a soil moisture probe for your site-specific management will help you monitor moisture properly. So consider the environment, cools canopy temperatures, restricts air circulation, poor evaporation, reduced photosynthesis, slower metabolism, reduced transpiration are all parts of turf grasses under shade. Root competition, maybe you do need to water more because the tree roots are competing with you. So there's always a different environment. Diseases, even if sunlight is sufficient for growth, shaded turf may still die or be weakened by one or several diseases. We see things that like powdery mildew or slime molds or leaf rust that wouldn't typically be a problem, but if it's a heavy enough shade, can just block enough light that plant now dies from shade stress because of the fungal spores on the leaf and the lack of light. So, moderate temperatures, what happens for disease and air movement, you can reduce. Shade increases the length of time that leaves stay wet, so that disease triangle becomes an issue. But several diseases, your powdery mildews, slime molds, leaf spot, rust, rhizoctonia, microdochium patches, they are all problems in the shade. Again, shade tolerant species, the Polycypina, is resistant to powdery mildew, unlike Kentucky bluegrass, because it's healthier under those low light conditions. It can grow out of those conditions. So buffer the boundary layer. Maybe you use fans, green side fans or something to circulate the air under heavy shade so you don't get a higher pressure of diseases. Plant growth regulators, PGRs, particularly the type 2 or the late GA inhibiting ones. We got now a new one called a new. There's Primo or Trinexpec ethyl. All plant growth regulators are a great tool to help manage turf under low light conditions. Whether it's our Bermudas, the Cynodons, our least shade tolerant grass, using a plant growth regulator is one tool to help improve it under low light. All the way up to zoysia grasses or even that Polycypina, the most shade tolerant turf grass out there is also benefited under shade by using a plant growth regulator. These late GA inhibiting ones like Trinexpec ethyl, what they do is they stop that cell elongation. They reduce that cell elongation. It conserves that energy. That plant can continue to photosynthesize. Some studies show that there's higher concentrations of chlorophyll, which is the light harvesting component of that plant, and it can partition that energy for new shoot growth or new root growth. So they, work by slowing elongation of the leaves. Here's some work that was done several years ago on zoysia grass at the University of Missouri by Dr. Eric Irvin. And if you look at this slide, this first figure is the quality of the zoysia grass, and this is Meyer zoysia grass in June. And the very first bar on the left, this teal bar or whatever it would be, is 100%. This is the quality. Everything else is a percent of this no shade and no Trinexpec ethyl zoysia grass. So you look at the quality of the dark blue bar next to it, slightly lower, but it's Trinexpec ethyl applied at 1x the rate, the labeled rate, with no shade. And basically there's no difference. When you go here, there's no Trinexpec ethyl on this green bar and 75% shade. And so it's at about 70% quality of the full sun, no Trinexpec ethyl plot. The light green bar is the same level of shade, same 75% shade, but with Trinexpec ethyl. And it's up about 95% of the control plot, which is full sun. So here we can see the benefits of applying Trinexpec ethyl under 75% shade. Now you get to 90% shade, it's lower, but it's still better than 90% shade with Trinexpec ethyl is a higher quality than 75% shade with no Trinexpec ethyl. So you can see it's still at about 75% of what the full sun is. Now you do that in June, you do it for another July and August, 3 months later, the quality's dropped off. It still isn't enough light. So, it's exhausting its carbohydrates. It's starting to go under a lot of shade stress. Here's a picture of what the shade structures look like that they used. And you can see that the quality's just dropped off. Well, the density, if you measure density, is there too. It's just dropped off. And we know that applying Trinex ethyl shortens the internodes and full sun. You get a higher density turf, and that's why we're at 110% of the control, because if it's a percent of the control, we got denser with the Trinex ethyl and full sun. But you can just see it's a tool that works. Here's some work that was done at Texas A&M on diamond zoysia grass under 60% shade with no Trinex ethyl and Trinex ethyl, and it wasn't enough shade on the zoysia matrella to really see an effect. But when you get to 90% shade, all of a sudden you can now see on the left is where it was treated with Trinex ethyl. On the right, it wasn't. I also want to point out these are plots. These are research plots at a university, and there's no traffic or simulated wear applied. But if you think you're trying to play golf or do some wear on these, maybe the 60% with Trinex ethyl would actually hold up better than the one without. This is an old picture from 1998 of a project I did in La Plata, Argentina, looking at Poa again. The most shade tolerant grass we have, under 90% shade, you can see how thin and spindly the grass grows. It grows by stolons, but you can see it's got very little rooting, spindly leaves. When you put Trinex ethyl with it, you get darker, wider, coarser textured leaves, more stolon growth, a lot more root mass. It's just a healthier plant. So plant growth regulators are definitely a tool. How do they work? Again, measuring photosynthesis. Again, some work done by Steyer and Rogers. If you remember Kentucky bluegrass photosynthesizing at 1 micromole per meter squared per second, when you put Trinex ethyl on Kentucky bluegrass and you measure photosynthesis, it now photosynthesizes at 1.4 micromoles per meter squared per second. It increases its efficiency to photosynthesize almost as much as that Poa that was at 1.5 micromoles per meter squared per second. So you can see this is a great tool, whether it's a shade tolerant or non-shade tolerant species. How often do you apply it? Well, when you have shade stress and you're applying a plant growth regulator, just know that everything is slowed down. That's why we use less nitrogen. The metabolism of the plant is slowed down. So you could look at no plant growth regulator being applied, but this is the quality of the turf grass. And basically you could look at monthly applications versus applications every 2 weeks. And you can see that actually going at monthly applications, whereas normally people will be applying plant growth regulator every 7 to 10 to 14 days, you can actually extend it if you want on shaded turf grasses because the plant isn't growing enough or fast enough to metabolize the plant growth regulator that you need that reapplication so fast. So I don't know how well it works with the growing degree day models that are now out there for reapplications. When you have shade, that's another compounding thing that reduces when it needs to be done. So temperature and shade reduce or determine frequencies. So I think I got about 5 or 10 minutes here, or 10 minutes to go. So I got some things to fly through almost, but a little summary of turfgrass management and shade. Limit traffic, monitor diseases closely, apply PGRs if the expense is justified. They're off patent now. In the United States, it's only $20 US an acre. So, that would be the equivalent of $40 US, a little over $45 for a hectare. So not too much, it's not that expensive, especially for the benefits you get from it. Use your maximum mowing height, limit your nitrogen fertilization, apply sufficient but minimal irrigation. Don't overwater, but don't make sure there's always plant available water for photosynthesis to occur. Remove obstacles to improve air movement. Try to prune some trees, leaves, valuable, be flexible. If there's an area that it's in the rough of a golf course or something and you can't grow grass, maybe you look at an alternative species or a mulch. Again, all of these things, the plant growth regulators, reduce mowing frequencies some. Again, the big one is communication as well. So some remedies, selective tree pruning, trying to get up there, look at branches, do things. Sports turf world, this is a picture of Amsterdam Arena to like a recent one. From the first picture I showed you, they don't resod the stadium anymore. They don't have to, because they now spend their money on, instead of sod, they spend it on electricity and lights, because it's picking one or the other. They can maybe use a plant growth regulator. So you can see that this is the first stadium to get these grow lights from SGL, which is also a Dutch company. It came from Porto Nova Rose Company, where they grow the world's highest quality red roses. And they took the same lighting technology and they use it to help grow the grasses in these stadiums. Again, a lot of labor goes into them, but they do a good job. This happens to be in the United States and at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin, a very cold climate, very cold in the winter. And you can see the effects that these lights have had, that they moved it from basically this 30-yard line to this end on the south end. They move these lights and they get the heat from the high pressure sodium, which they want, and the added light. And you can see where the grass is actually grown out of the paint. You can still see the paint here, but you can't see the paint here because the lights caused the grass to grow right out of the paint. Again, here's Allianz Arena in Munich, Bayern Munich Stadium. You can see where they put the lights on the south end of the stadium and how much more growth they've gotten as a result of it. So these grow lights are great for stadiums, and some golf courses are starting to use them now. LED lights are really good. If you have cool season turf grasses, you can do LED lights, and they also pump in CO2. An increase in the levels of atmospheric CO2 will make the cool season grasses more efficient. It won't do anything for the warm season grasses though, however. We've been doing some work at the University of Tennessee comparing. This is a shade structure that we've built, and we move our turf grasses in here, and we look at them for different lights. And the yellow light is the high pressure sodium, where you don't see the middle one with much light at all. That's our control plot with no light. And then the more the violet pinky light here is the LED lights that we're looking at. And we're looking at it under 95% shade, pretty heavy shade. We've looked at Cynodon species and Poa pratensis. And just some of the things that we've noticed, comparing it to the plants growing in full sun, the LED lights shorten the internode lengths and make the grasses very similar, almost as similar to what they are in full sun. The high pressure sodium lights compared to the shade ones, you can see the shade plots, the no light ones below, also compress the internode lengths, but you still get a little bit more elongated growth. And I think that's probably coming from that yellow light. There's more yellow light where there's more blue light in the LED light. So you get a more compressed growth. So you can see that how the effects of those have on the plants. So again, using the lights where they're needed in stadiums. Again, sports stadiums, the Gelderdoom was the first one in Arnhem, Holland to actually probably do what sports stadiums should be doing, is having a portable pitch that's outside. You can have your concerts, your events, whatever you want inside. When you want to play your soccer, your football, whatever, your rugby match, you slide the field indoors. University of Phoenix Stadium in Arizona, similar one. Here's the field outside. Here's the field outside. And I was visiting, you can see outside the stadium. Make sure when they originally designed this stadium, they went to Dr. Trey Rogers at Michigan State, the architects, and they said, "What do you think?" He goes, "This is great. They do this in Holland, and this is the perfect thing. You just one problem." They're like, "What's that?" Flip it 180 degrees, because the original design had the field going out on the other end of the stadium, on the north end of the stadium, which was putting it into the shadow of the stadium. So, one problem to the other. So they flip it, they roll it out onto the south end of the stadium. It's in full sun. When they want to play games, they move it in. It takes 90 minutes to move the field in to the stadium. A lot of noise. So you can see this is a video of the field slowly moving into the stadium. As it moves in, as I said, it takes 90 minutes. You can move it in. Once it's inside, whether it's the roof's open or closed, it doesn't matter. They can play the game. And when the game's over, they move it back out. That's what stadiums should be doing. But, using grow lights is another one. I'm going to finish up the rest of it of talking about taking control of your shade and measuring and communicating your shade issues to your administrators. Heavy shade on greens. We've got sensors to measure light quality and intensity. There's total radiance ones that can measure foot candles or lux. That's about 50% par with these meters. So, you get what you pay for, get some good meters. But, then the other thing you want to do is map it. Map where the shade issues are going or occurring on your field, and you can get that spatial analysis looking where shade is occurring on your pitch, and you can see the heavy shade on one end versus other end. So you can put these in Excel and you can map these pretty good. You can kind of transpose your soccer field over it, or if it's your putting green, whatever you want. I like to use these things, and these are probably some older prices in American dollars. But these Spectrum Watchdog data loggers, and there's several other ones out there. They got quantum sensors, so PAR sensors. This can measure, photosynthetically active radiation. And what you can do is you can set these up and measure different parts, your full sun and your shade areas on your green, for instance. And if you've got a putting green and you put this in full sun, you get it set up to measure every 10 minutes, every 1 hour, every 30 minutes, whatever you want. You go back, you collect the data, and you got it in the shade versus the full sun. Don't mind the temperatures in Fahrenheit, but the big thing is the column on the far left, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning throughout the day. And then here's the shade, and here's the micromoles per meter squared per second. And you can see at about 1 o'clock or 1300, it's 328 micromoles per meter squared per second. That's as bright as the sun got that day in the shaded part of the screen. And this happened to be in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I am in October. In the full sun area, we were up at 1500 micromoles per meter squared per second. So just simple math, it's about 5 times more bright in the full sun than it is in the shade. You map it out in a figure, graph it out on a figure, and kind of look at it and see the full sun versus shade. And then the other thing you can start to do is say, all right, we're measuring this, and this is the light intensity. Let's say we look at 10 a.m. It's 220 micromoles per meter squared per second at 10 a.m. Well, we know from 10 to 11 a.m. that's 1 hour. In 1 hour, so if we're measuring it per second, well, there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. So 60 times 60 is 3,600. So we take each one of these measurements, multiply it by 3,600, and that gives us how many micromoles per meter squared per hour we have. And then we go and we add those up, and we get a number of 8,645,486 micromoles per day. You divide that by a million, and that gets you 8.6 moles of light per day. And that was the shade. So now we can go and map this and look at it and see that under the shade, we had 8.6 moles of light per day versus the 48 moles of light we had in the full sun. So we have 18% of full sunlight. Now, this is something you can do, go measure on your golf course or on your sports field, and you take this to your administrators to say, look, this is why we justify needing to prune trees, go to a more shade tolerant grass, or get grow lights for our stadium, or do different things. But this is a way to communicate what you do. And to do that, you could also use this app. I think this is one of the best inventions ever. This is the Sunseeker app. I think it was originally designed for interior decorating or interior design. So interior designers and architects can look and find where to design a place and set up a room and look at the feng shui of how the light's going to come in and benefit the ambience. And we've taken it in the turfgrass world to take out trees. I think to date, I've helped take out over 400 trees on golf courses simply using this app. This is that Hamburger Land and Golf Club in Hittfeld, Germany, just outside of Hamburg. And this is on June 21st when we were there visiting back in 2011 when they actually started taking some of these trees out of the screen. This is Dr. Karcher from the University of Arkansas and my colleague, Dr. Brosnan at the University of Tennessee. But what I'm doing is I'm standing with this app on the green, and you can see that on June 21st at 6 a.m., that's where the sun's going to be. We happen to be there at August 12th. And at 6 a.m. on August 12th is where the sun, this is where in the horizon where the sun was. So lower in the sky because the day's not as long, and you can see, and basically you can take a picture, you snap it, you go over at 7 a.m. This is where the sun would be. And then you look down here, the shortest day of the year, because it's really far north. They're like 50 some degrees latitude north, 51 or 52 degrees north latitude. So at 6 a.m. on December 22nd, this is where the sun is. It's never seeing sunlight because the sun's still not even coming up yet. Just keep snapping pictures. Got a little arrow pointing to where the sun is. And you can see sun, this green's now where I'm standing on the green because they've removed a lot of trees, is in full sun. You can see still in December, this green is never seeing any sunlight. Fortunately, it's so cold that the grass is probably it's either under snow, or it's so cold that it's not growing anymore, or the trees have lost their leaves anyway, so there may be some light penetrating through to the green, but it's not a big deal there. But you can see going through 2 p.m., 3 p.m. in the afternoon, 4 p.m., and again, it's now 4:36. That's where the sun is. So it puts this little thing over the sun so you can take a picture and you can start to see it's now starting to get close to hitting those trees again. And by 5 p.m., that it's going to be gone behind that tree, and that shade, that green's going to now be under shade. So this is a great app to use to go and mark and find trees. And doesn't mean you have to take out the trees, but you can do some selective pruning. Now, the next thing would be is to go and say, all right, we don't have to take out all these trees, but what if we just cleared up the canopy under these trees, have them up top? You can see the top of the trees. This is fine. Let's look at the top of these trees, be all nice. And it goes under shade for a little bit, but then when it gets down here, we get more light through and we get some light on that green. And we can do some of that. So that's is a great way to use this Sunseeker app. It used to be only a 99-cent app. Now I think it's a $6 or $8 app or something American dollars. So but it's a great tool. So with that, I'd like to just, some of the take-home points from today, think of when you're managing turf and shade, what is it that you're doing that is impacting the light and the ability of the plant to photosynthesize? Is there anything you can do? What types of shade are you have? Is it tree shade? Is it a building causing its structure? But what are the effects of the shade on your turf? What is it doing to it morphologically, physiologically? What are your management practices going on of the primary cultural practices, plus using plant growth regulators? Using research to help know that we reduce nitrogen, use plant growth regulators, don't overwater, mow at the highest height possible. And then using the tools of these light Sunseeker apps or light sensors to measure your shade so you can communicate to your administrators why you do what you do and justify what you're doing and why you have the challenges of shade in your situation. With that, again, I'd like to thank the AGIF again for having me present and open it up to some questions. Eric, I believe this is going to be on YouTube, but my email is here. And if anyone wants to write down my email and send me an email, I'm happy to send you a PDF version of this talk so you can have it and actually see those figures and use them to help your administrators. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I'm not the greatest twit. I try to tweet sometimes, but please follow me on Twitter. And I appreciate everyone very much. Thank you.
Dr. John, the thanks all goes to you. What a fantastic presentation, and thank you for spending all your time with us. We do have some questions here, quite a few questions. Let me go through that. Blair from New Zealand is asking, at what point would you consider that artificial lighting is required specifically for ryegrass and Bermuda?
Okay, I'm assuming, is this for a stadium then, Blair? The artificial light?
I haven't enabled the speaking function, so Blair will
okay,
have to.
Yeah. So, I guess when you go and measure, the nice thing is to take that sensor and to go measure that light. Because I'm seeing this thing. So artificial light, I think, when the cost is justified, it's always, if you can get the cost to justify getting it, it's good. But if you can measure those light sensors, obviously it's going to be different for ryegrass and Bermuda grass. But Bermuda grass at a sports field height, you know, you're mowing that grass probably, if it's, I'm guessing being if he's a Kiwi, I've got family in Auckland, it's probably, you know, rugby, so it's intensive wear and intensive play on it. You probably going to be mowing that at 20 mil, somewhere around there, plus or minus. If you're not getting more than 35 moles of light per day, you probably want some sufficient lights. If you're getting down to the low 30s, 20s, and that's where you're going to want it. For the ryegrasses, you know, probably in the low 20s. Again, they're in teens. You might want some supplemental lighting, especially if it's seasonal. So that's it, and then a lot of environmental things as well. But yeah, happy to even talk some more on that for sure.
Yeah, and for clarification, Doctor, we'll be sending a follow-up email with all the registrants participants. So we'll include your email for other discussions. So
yeah, that's what I'm here for. I want to get hold of me anytime you want. So yeah, that's hopefully I can help. So
we have a question from Ross in Hong Kong. What's the difference between moles M2 par and W/M2?
So the moles, we like to measure watts. Like there's different ways of measuring light. So you can measure light in foot candles, lux. You know, a foot candle is the old historic way of the intensity of one candle held 1 foot from your face. And full sun is the equivalent of 10,000 candles 1 foot from your face. So watts per meter squared is it's more encompassing light, and it gets more wavelengths and beyond what's photosynthetically active. So we want to do the micromoles of photosynthetically active, or PAR. So that's what the plants are actually going to be using to photosynthesize. So that's why we want to look at it in watts and moles of per meter squared of PAR, of PAR is the
This is
key.
a follow-up question from Ross on following up. And using watts per meter square, what general number would you put to a cloudy day, medium sunny day, and a full sunny day? I have a weather station that records watts per meter squared.
Yeah, so I don't know that exactly off the top of my head, so I don't want to safely answer that. But if it's like the total irradiance dose light meters, the PAR is probably about 50% of what he's getting. So if it's giving him 1600 watts per meter squared, it might be only 800 moles. I'm guessing of PAR, but I'm not sure. It's definitely worth it. These light sensors aren't that expensive for what the value of them are. So to get one that's actually measuring PAR would be a quantum light sensor would be better. But yeah, I'm not sure 100% on that, but I think if it's like the total radiance dose, about 50%.
We have another follow-up from Ross. Have you had any experience managing shade with some of these carbohydrate-based products, i.e. Carbo-Aid, that claim to help turf under shaded and low light environments?
Great question. Yes, actually my PhD dissertation was looking at what we call exogenous applications of high fructose corn syrup to replace the lack of what we call photosynthate, the carbohydrates that the plant can produce because it's not enough light. And it's extremely challenging. And those products that are being marketed, in my opinion, aren't doing anything because the plant, because they're usually using a glucose or a sucrose molecule, and those molecules are too big for the plant to take up through the leaves. And so if you apply them to the soil, they're not going to take them up to the roots either, because the soil microbes are going to feed off them before any roots could possibly take up that large molecule. When I did use a fructose, if you take high fructose corn syrup and you use a non-ionic surfactant, you can apply that to the leaf and you can get the leaf to absorb high fructose corn syrup. I know on coarse season grasses, they responded positively and they partitioned it into photosynthetic and into actually cellular growth. So yes, you can, but the products that are out there now aren't getting absorbed by the plant because the molecule is too big if it's glucose or sucrose, if it's not the right foliar fructose molecule.
From Joel in Hong Kong, hi, I'd like to know your thoughts on amino products under shade. Is that, yeah.
amino products under shade.
Under shade, yes.
Yeah, again, a lot of these I haven't seen any that have done any improvements of it. The plants are going to produce their amino acids naturally. They're really they're super efficient at it. So I've never seen the return on investment for the costs of putting a lot of these the biostimulants or the seaweed extracts under shade, enhancing the growth. But there may be some literature out there that I haven't come across. But we've done some trials in first years, but then the companies have backed off and don't want us to do it. So because they're not getting the results we've wanted to see. But I think more work needs to be done on that to see if there's the right way, because there's probably something that can be done to benefit the efficiencies of helping improve things. But right now I haven't seen anything. It's more about watching, not over applying your nitrogen fertilization.
And a related question from Henry in Malaysia: does plant biostimulant like seaweed extract and carbohydrates help in managing shade?
Again, yeah, those are the same thing. The carbohydrates and the biostimulants, they're not going to have the high fructose molecule, like sugar molecule. If it's a fructose and you do a light foliar, there's some do, and you have to do it weekly. But yeah, otherwise, I don't see that they're going to really enhance much under shade. I haven't seen any data on it, so that's just what I can report. But again, we need, like I said in my talk, we need a lot more work to be doing from a lot of shade, especially on the warm season grasses, because there seems to be more stuff done on cool season for sure.
We have a question from Anit, and Anit in India. Thank you, Professor, for the very insightful presentation. You suggested about less watering on the shaded areas. What do you do when a golf course has full irrigation designed at the time of development of the golf course, and later 10 years that has full grown trees affecting many areas in its canopy? With its canopy, how does someone handle controlled irrigation in those shaded areas, as the irrigation system is already designed much in advance and the trees have grown much later? I see this problem in many golf courses here in India, and unfortunately, due to the environmental laws, pruning is very limited. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's yeah, and that was that golf course in Germany. It's like an act of Congress to try to get a tree down. They love their trees. Yeah, those are very challenging. Because my first thing when I was listening to you and reading your question, and it as yeah, cut down the trees, but you can't if you can't take them down. Going back and expanding or redoing your irrigation system if you can. And I mentioned early on, I worked at the Boulders Golf Resort in Carefree, Arizona, and they had at the time the most sophisticated rainbird system where every head had individual control and was monitored on how long you could put it on. Now that's really a lot more common on newer designs. That was back in the 90s, early 90s. My other suggestion would be is water to the shade. And then unfortunately, you may need to hand water the full sun areas separately if you've got a quick coupler system or a hand hose or something like that. Especially if it's a green. If it's a green, it's a really common practice just to irrigate to the least minimum amount with your overhead irrigation system, and then as the green starts to dry out, the areas that you know are drying out, you hand water those greens, and always take those soil moisture map or sensors and map your green and know where your green is and where the wilting point is on that green, so you can know that it's more labor intensive, but that hand watering is going to save you probably in the long term. I don't know if I answered that very well or enough, but definitely that's a challenge.
I have a final question, I guess, from myself and the AGIF is, I noted that with you that we do a certificate of greenskeeping, which is along with the RNA and some of our partners, and we're looking to do in the future a groundskeeping certification. In your experience, you're dealing with both greenskeepers and groundskeepers. How, and specifically probably most of the migration would be from golf to groundskeeping in our part of the world. How transferable are the skills that you see going from golf to sports field management?
I think they're very transferable. I mean, it's all about continuing to learn and wanting to learn, and whether it's a grounds manager or a greenskeeper, I call them all turfies, and we're all of us in this industry are unique breeds, and it's that striving for perfection. If you're a greenskeeper and you got a golf course and you've got greens, fairways, tees, you got all sorts of different environments and climates that you're working with, in different grasses. It's an unbelievable challenge. And when you think you got that dialed in perfect, you're going to see something that's out of place. Same thing with the a groundsman, the sports manager. Yeah, you've got a rugby scrum, and I don't know anything that's more abusive to a grounds than a rugby scrum or lacrosse. In the big sport here in the U.S., the goalies play goalmouths for a lacrosse goalie. You might have the same grass over the whole thing, but the abuse that they take is a lot. And I think being a perfectionist, being a good communicator, and not only a good communicator to your administrators, but also a good communicator to your crew and motivating the people that work for you, identifying and how to get them to take pride in what they're doing. Because a lot of times as the boss, you got a lot of people working for you that, they don't care because they're not getting paid or a lot of money or whatever. But if you can show them the respect and get them to take pride in what they're doing and the value, I mean, everyone's great at doing that, and not everyone's great at doing it, but the successful ones are great at doing that, and that's what we like to see. And you can make that jump from one to the other. I've seen people go from golf to sports turf and vice versa and succeed, and I've seen some fail, but the ones that can communicate and motivate do well. Growing the grass is the easiest part, right? Eventually, it should be.
Great. Well, thank you, John, for staying up late. I know it's getting fairly late there where you are. We really appreciate all the knowledge that you've imparted in this brief time. And as we've discussed, we'd love to have you out here when we could, when you don't have to spend a couple of months in quarantine.
Yes, thank you.
But hopefully that's very soon. So really on behalf of the AGIF and anybody who attended and will view this webinar, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Eric. Take care, everybody.
But I'm just going to follow up with with our viewers here. Thanks for taking your time out of a busy schedule. Just to highlight that we do have a couple more webinars coming up this month. Next Thursday, the 22nd at 8 p.m. We have a recorded interview with Sir Nick Faldo, who shared some time with us on his design business, and we'll have Mark Adams from Faldo Design and Adam Calver from Laguna Lanco, a Faldo Design course on to answer questions about that. And then on the following Thursday, the 29th at 10 a.m., we'll be going back to Turfgrass with Dr. Kevin Kenworthy, and he'll be talking about improvements in zoysia and Bermuda grass for use on golf courses. So that's just the start. Please continue to check on the website for upcoming webinars. And that's it for now. Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. Thank you all.